Then how would you describe the role of a board director?
So I think board directors have a responsibility to act within in the best interest of the union as possible. So making strategic decisions at board meetings, voting on motions, all of that kind of thing. They represent the board at events. They obviously turn up to every single board meeting and give their give representation of students and direct the board in a place that is the best for the student community. There's obviously a lot more sort of very niche kind of parts, but I think generally that's moving the union in the best direction possible and representing the students.
Thank you. Could you please tell us what are your favorite policies and why?
My favorite policies from my own campaign?
Yes, from your own campaign.
Yep. So I have a whole bunch of policies. I think my favorite ones in particular, in terms of ones that are that stand out, I think, or are more on the sort of exciting side, is I absolutely love live music and students performing on campus, and that's something that I really, really, really want to focus on, and that I want to bring if I was a board director. That's something that I've mentioned. Another part I think is another part of my policies is bringing more mental health services to campus and the union's involvement in mental health services, and filling the gaps of the CAPS system which the university has already. Mental health is something that is so unbelievably important, and at this time as well, when we're all in isolation, when we all go back to uni, we need those support services there so we can have the ability to reconnect with each other again. One more, if you would like one more, or was it 2 or 3 that you asked?
That's right.
Oh, 3. Oh, awesome. Another one I think in particular is I, as a part of, because I have 3 areas of policies, and a part of re-energizing campus when we go back is to have much more USU sponsored events to make sure that students, events are accessible. You don't have to look very far to find an event. They're very easy to go to. Events such as more coffee catch-ups, more things like CNS nights, trivia nights, all of that kind of thing, I think would be amazing. And I'm very, very excited to work on if I'm lucky enough to be elected.
Thank you. So let's just move on to the next one. USU is currently facing some financial stress due to the loss of revenue related to COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So if you had to, where would you cut the fundings from USU's current operations? And how do you think USU should economics?
Yeah, so I got asked a similar question in the Honey interview, asking where I would cut any form of funding. I think my attitude towards the union and my policy statement, this is a very hard question to answer because it doesn't have anything to do with cuts or anything. I think, it's a very, very difficult question to ask. I think there's a lot. If I was elected as a board director, there's a lot of financial info that I would be privy to that I'm not now. But I think I wouldn't cut a particular program in particular. I wouldn't cut something like reviews or a specific outlet. I would have to diversify over a broader scale. So I couldn't just completely crush one program or one area, I think.
Okay. So not a specific area. So you're not going to cut it from like a specific area, right?
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay, sure. Could you please name us one thing that you think USU has done well during your time in uni?
They've done heaps of things really, really well. I think the Health and Wellbeing Day is an amazing thing, which I, as someone who's very, very passionate about mental health, I think that's a brilliant initiative. There are a whole bunch of things that they've done since then. I really, really appreciate the Pride Week as well, which, SAS has a very, very deep involvement with, which I think is wonderful. I also think more recently, adjusting to COVID-19, I think the union has done a particularly good job. I think doing things online, doing things like incubate sessions online and etc. Have been really, really great. So I was very impressed by that.
Okay. So could you please also name one thing that you think USU has done poorly during your time in uni?
That's a good question. I mean, there hasn't necessarily been one particular thing. I just think across the board, there are things that could have been done better. I definitely think that in terms of, I think, mental health and wellbeing day, as I mentioned before, is something that the union has done well, but I definitely think that there can be a lot of improvement in that area. I think students are are often let down by the CAPS program at university, and I think the union has the opportunity to really involve itself as much as possible in that area and consider counselling services and all of that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. There's one very controversial decision that USU has made was to allow the registration of Love Choice and anti-abortion group as a club. So many people opposed this on the basis of its potential impacts on students who may have had an abortion before. So what is your position on how the USU should approach on controversial clubs and societies like this?
Yeah, I think I think this delves into a larger issue on campus, which is that if you have the freedom of freedom of speech and freedom to associate, which is what clubs and societies are founded in, does that grant you the freedom to potentially insult other people? Look, I think if I was a board director and I was managing that decision, I think that I would take every single side into consideration when making that decision, and whether I would support that or not. I think it's very, very contentious. I think that and I acknowledge that completely. I think there are a lot of sides at play. And I think, I would have to know a lot more about, the responsibilities when elected as a board director, because, when you get elected as a board director, you are privy to a lot more information. You're privy to a lot more of the workings of the USU. And I think, I would have to make a decision there based on all the information that was brought to me. It's a very, very tough issue. Definitely, I acknowledge that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, how political do you think USU should be? And should it make statements on current political issues affecting students' lives? And should it provide a platform for students' political beliefs?
I personally don't think that the USU should be inherently political. I think that it should be inherently there to represent and work for students. I acknowledge that, it has been political in the past. I think that there's an element of that that's, inescapable because students do involve themselves in politics and political opinions. I completely acknowledge that as a student of politics and political economy, but I think for the most part, the union should definitely try and stay away from contentious political issues that divide students and focus mostly on providing the great services that it has done in the past.
Sure. Next question is, so board directors have duties to USU, which means you have to put the board's interest above your own. And you can be sued if you're acting against the board's interest. So if something really bad was happening in the USU, would you consider leaking it? If not, then what would you do?
I wouldn't consider leaking it, I don't think, because that's a part of my contract as a board director. I think that, there are, I don't think the responsibility of something bad happening, would completely rely on me. There are plenty of student media publications at Sydney Uni that I'm sure would get it onto something really horrible happening. But I think my responsibility, I would trust that the union would have my, trust in me for not leaking for the best reasons, for the best reasons of students, for the best interest of students, sorry, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, do you think USU is doing enough to support the international students community?
I definitely think that they could do a lot more, but I do think that they're generally doing a really good job. I think one area that I've particularly noticed just over the past couple of years at uni is that Pulp has done a really good job at doing articles in languages that are most occupied by international students. So releasing articles that are translated, all of that kind of thing. I think that's a really, really good idea. I think it's really important. So
Thank you.
all international students should have the right to read what's going on with their student union. That's so common sense. And the fact that, that hasn't happened before now. I think, yeah, so I'm very, very happy with how the board has done that. I think it's very principled. But one of my policies actually is ensuring that all new events that aim to sort of re-energize campus life when we come back are as accessible to international students as they can. So I definitely think using areas like Pulp to broadcast that to international students with the great work that you guys have done is definitely one of my priorities.
Thank you. So let's move to the next one, which is, if you're selected as a board member, how would you ensure that students' feedback is taken into consideration when you are making decisions? And how will you ensure that USU caters to all the USU students?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of avenues in which you can receive feedback either as a board director or to the union itself. I'm absolutely, I really, really do get around student feedback in any way, shape, or form. I think I've demonstrated that quite well just with being the Art Society president. There have been a lot of people that have come to me, at the end of last year and said, "Hey, SAS didn't do this last year or the year before. You should consider doing this now. This is genuine feedback from art students," and I've really, really taken that on board. I'm really, really interested in what students have to say and their views of the union, and how I can best improve that. What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
How will you ensure that USU caters to all the USU students?
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of policies that I've included there that make sure that we're catering to all kinds of students, especially reaching out to making sure that it's accessible to student bodies like international and postgraduate students is really important. I feel that they occasionally can feel left out of the union's activities, and I think there are a number of different avenues, such as through Pulp, such as all of the outward media that goes from the USU is accessible to those groups as possible, as accessible to those groups as possible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next one. So, given the fact that USU wants to be involved in choosing Michael Span's replacement, what would you want the next vice chancellor to be?
Is that in terms of experience, or who I would want?
Experience. What kind of people do you want him to be? Like anything.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very, very good question. I think, look, someone that has a really, really diligent background in organising large bodies of students or of people is very, very important. I think a main thing that I would like to see is that this person has a history of listening to and focusing in on large groups of people and getting key messages out of those groups of people. So there's not a disconnect between the vice chancellor and the student body. I think, and I'm not necessarily saying that there is, I'm not accusing the former vice chancellor of having that, but I think that that's so instrumental to any form of university administration, that the vice chancellor respects students' voices, and has the ability to sort of see key themes of the student body that the students are not happy with and act on that.
Thank you.
I'm just going to turn off my Safari. I think I've got a thing that. Sorry, I've got.
Okay, sure, no worries.
It keeps going off. Sorry about that.
It's okay, no worries.
There we go. Done.
Okay, so let's move to the next one. How to reinvigorate campus culture, do you think?
So how do I reinvigorate campus culture?
Yeah, campus culture, yeah.
Yeah. So I have a whole bunch of things that I want to do to reinvigorate campus culture. I think what I want to focus on, especially in terms of that area, is that students are coming back from months in isolation. It's been an absolutely awful time for the student body at Sydney Uni. We need to make sure, and I want to make sure, that when students come back, they have a thriving campus culture to access and to enjoy. And so I think some of the things that I mentioned before in terms of policies was bringing more accessible USU social events. And they don't have to be necessarily large parties. They can be quite small. And I think especially as isolation measures will be progressively repealed, we won't just be able to gather in groups of 500 or 600 as a matter of days. building up from that and ensuring that there are, acceptable small gatherings and then medium gatherings and large gatherings. Things like CNS nights, coffee catch-ups, meet and greets, trivia nights, more drinks nights. I think that would be fantastic, and ensuring that they're adequately advertised across all forms of the USU's media, so as many students can come along to it and not feel like they have to search really hard to find a social event that they can, meet other students. I also think ensuring that the Manning Bar space that will be changed is a really, really, really accessible and dynamic place for students to gather. And I think, those are my main sort of points. Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you have any preference deals with any candidates right now? And if you don't, do you have someone that you most like to work with?
I don't have any preference deals at all with any candidates. I'm open to working with anyone, as long as they have the interests of the students at heart, which I hope they do. There are some really, really great candidates. There are some really, really talented ones all across, the candidate field this year. There are a couple that I've already worked with. Belinda Thomas is the Secretary of SAS, and we have a very, very good professional relationship as we've worked together a lot this year. And I have some, friendships that I've already made through just general things at uni. Like I already know Ben Hines as a friend of mine. So there are some people that I don't have any deals with anyone or any kind of thing yet, but there are certainly some people that, I already have a relationship with, but I guess we'll see.
Okay, good. Good luck with that. May I ask you if there's someone that you're least likely to work with?
No, I don't think there's anyone that I'm least likely to work with, as long as they have the interests of students at heart and they want to become a board director to, move the board in the best possible direction. Then it doesn't matter what, of any differences personally. We're here to work for the board and we're here to work together. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So just one more question, that is, could you please tell us what color are you running with and who is your campaign manager?
Yep. So I'm running with light blue. And my campaign manager is two campaign managers, Nicholas Comino and Zach Pitketley.
Okay. Thank you. Just asking other editors, do you have any other questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, I have a couple. So I thought I'd just kind of circle back to what you were talking about with regards to events.
Yeah.
So I definitely think what you've talked about with events is really good. I was just wondering kind of where students are facing things like long working hours, really long commutes, and increasing rent, as well as after the COVID-19 crisis, perhaps also financial difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
How can we reach out to all students, including the people facing these material factors, to help build event attendance across the board of students?
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's a really, really good point. I think utilising, I definitely think that there are things that the union can do to make these events more financially accessible to students. Things like, ensuring that the events are done in happy hour to ensure that, people aren't forking out a lot for drinks and all of that kind of thing. Making sure that there's cheaper food and drinks on campus. That around that kind of time that those events take place, definitely. I think just having as many events as possible, ensuring that there's just that the opportunity is always there for students to have, no matter, where they come from or where they, commute from. When they're at uni, there's going to be an event around the time that they're there, so they're able to come and communicate with students. Was there another part of your question, sorry, that did that answer it well? Sorry?
Yeah, that's all good.
Yeah. Awesome, thanks.
My next question is just with regards to your answer about politics and having a sort of apolitical board.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering what you think about, for instance, things which really directly affect students. So for instance, at the moment, or actually not just students, like USU members. So for instance, at the moment, would you support the board advocating for things like more international student support from the government, or for more governmental support of university staff?
Yeah, no. So I think what I mentioned before to Vina was about how there are, there's a certain level of inevitability with any, form of politics occasionally or, more commonly. But I would certainly campaign for more support from the government for international students. I think it's necessary, and any other scenarios where, there's an involvement in government, if I deem it necessary, then absolutely I would definitely campaign for that kind of support, for sure.
Cool, thanks. And then also, I was wondering, the board has, or a lot of other candidates that we've interviewed have had problems with the board's sort of level of transparency and the fact that it has a very entrenched norm of going in camera. And Pulp has certainly experienced that when we report on it. So I was wondering, do you have similar problems with the level of transparency on the board? And also, would you consider sort of resisting going in camera as much as they currently do?
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I, as someone who attended the board meeting last week, I definitely understand how there's a level of frustration, which is that, the financial operations of the university, is something that I wanted to know and that I was really interested in. And it was frustrating that I couldn't view that. But at the same time, I do think that there are definitely elements of the board that are justified in terms of keeping confidential, things like sponsorship deals with companies and other relations with organisations that I do think that the board is entitled to have private. But that being said, I definitely do understand that it's frustrating for students to not hear those kind of things. And I think that there are more avenues that the board can be more transparent. It's something that I've seen over the past 2 years is that the USU has used different avenues to communicate to students and become more transparent in all of their operations. Doing things like live coverage of the board meetings is something that Pulp, I don't think, did very well in my first year. And it's something that I've really, really seen improve over the past couple of years to a point where it's done very, very well now. So I think that there are things that the board can do definitely to become more transparent. And I support those things, but I also acknowledge that there are some things that do, as an organisation that the board has to keep confidential, which is frustrating.
Right, great. I'm glad you enjoy our board coverage.
It's wonderful. You do a great job.
Thank you. Final question from me is just a follow-up for kind of not cutting from any program in particular.
Yep.
I think that's definitely reasonable. I'm wondering, in addition, if you have any plans about how to improve revenue streams and kind of increase the amount of cash flow that the USU has generally, particularly after COVID.
Yep. No, I think that's really, really important. I think, we need dynamic solutions to kind of bring in those, improve our cash flow. I think I'm definitely open to negotiating with a lot of organisations outside of Sydney Uni. I think that there are some ways that we can get sponsorship deals to achieve some of and definitely some of my goals that I've outlined in my policy statement. Things like, sponsorships from companies and organisations that specialise in mental health is something that the union, I think, would be really, really good at, and ensures that we don't spend a whole lot of money on these kind of programs and that we fund, or we get funding from other organisations. So we save money in that sense, and we have more money in the pocket in that way. I'm not. There are a lot of ways I think that the union can improve their avenues of funding. In particular, I really do think strongly about working with other organisations because the union has an unbelievable exposure in terms of the amount of students that are actively involved. And I think it's very much within the interests of other organisations to have their brand, recognisable to students. Definitely.
Great, yeah. Just as a follow-up on that, the USU in the last year has got some criticism for working with companies like, for instance, I think there was a horse racing ad a couple of months ago that the USU put on their emails and things like that. Do you think there are any sort of lines that the USU should draw about which companies they should work with, or any principles that you think the USU should tend to abide by on that matter?
I think that's a really, really good point. I think that's very relevant. I think that personally, and my own principles, is that all forms of organisational influence and sponsorships and all of that kind of thing should be directly relevant to students in every way possible. And if I was a board director, then if we had a sponsorship deal, if there was an organisation that wanted to work with us and put out their message, then I would have to rigorously ensure that message was directly relevant with students and promoted a healthy campus life through the union.
Cool, thanks. That's all from me.
Sorry,
Does anyone-
I think you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Sorry.
That's okay.
So does anyone else has any other questions?
I'm all good on my end. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Sure. So I guess that's for today's interview. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Okay. Have a lovely day.